Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome. The latest college football playoff rankings and projected bracket are officially here. We're breaking it all down, trying to make sense of this madness here on this Tuesday, November the 19th. This officially being the third of such rankings, and I believe only 2 or 3 more to go until we get the final rankings on that December 8th, that fateful day when we will know who is in the 12-team college football playoff. I'm Chris Phillips. He is Dave Shumate. He is Cole Thompson. And we are SEC Unfiltered. Again, appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in. Make sure you like, subscribe, turn notifications. Check us out via podcast where you get those. You can also find us across all social media platforms as well as our website, secunfiltered.com. And, of course, as always, we're brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, the official sponsors of the SEC Unfiltered tour that's taken us all across the SEC this season and will take us to the Lone Star State this upcoming weekend to take a look firsthand at one of those teams ranked in the top 12 of the college football playoff rankings, the Texas Longhorns. Again, guys, go to prizepicks.com, use promo code SECU at sign up to get that $50 bonus instantly when you play your first $5 or more lineup. College football, college basketball, NFL, NHL, NBA, you name it, they got it. Prizepicks.com. Promo code SECU to get that $50 bonus today. Once again, the latest college football playoff rankings and projected brackets are officially out. I'm Chris Phillips. He's Dave Shumate. He is Cole Thompson. Gentlemen, how are we feeling? About to pull up the top 25, the projected bracket, and there are absolutely no disagreements whatsoever. I'm kidding. That's the fun part. Hey, boys, what's going on? Really excited to chop it up with you and break this thing down.
Hey, I get more excited for this show than I do Sunday Fun Day. Maybe because it's nighttime, the moon's out. I don't know, more so than the sun's coming out in the morning. But I get fired up for this one. I feel like there's a little more energy. I can sense Cole's just pissed offness from another time zone. I'm in Atlanta. He's in Houston. I can feel it. I can feel it in my plums, man. But overall takes, I think they got the SEC order right. Again, I wouldn't have been upset if Ole Miss was above Alabama, but I think they got the SEC order right. I think Missouri's still staying in the top 25, something interesting. I tweeted it. I think that would almost guarantees with Alabama coming in at 7. If they beat Oklahoma, beat Auburn, even with a loss in Atlanta, it almost ensures they will be in. Again, if Missouri wins out, if they beat Mississippi State, beat Arkansas, I would assume they stay in that top 25. It's another win along with South Carolina moving up the chain as well. But those are my initial takes. Notre Dame being at 6, bothersome. I know Cole's got his take. I'm not going to rain on his Penn State parade. So, Cole, here's the microphone, brother.
Just get to the damn list. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It is. It is that we're having these conversations. And the most ridiculous part of all is that there are people that we respect in this industry that are creating false narratives about teams that belong in when we don't know when they truly belong in. I'm sorry. It's not that at all. It isn't. Are we going to respect wins? Are we going to respect losses? Are we going to respect strength of record? Or are we going to make this shit up on the fly every single Tuesday because we want the pretty logos at the top and the underdogs to have to continue to fight their way in? It's absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely atrocious. The only thing I will say is I warned all of you last week. Don't be shocked when Boise State gets that first round bye. Congratulations. Hell has frozen over. It has not frozen over on the plains of Auburn because you still have Hugh, but still, you do have now Boise State as a first round bye, which is going to create a lot of mystery and intrigue. What happens in the race down to the final bit of the Big 12?
Guys, let's go ahead and pull up these top 25 rankings. Guys, if you've tuned in at any time to this point, you know, we'll look at the top 25, then we'll pull up the bracket, we'll run through this thing, and we'll break it all down. So, without further ado, here is the Week 13 college football playoff rankings top 25. 25, you got Illinois, 24, UNLV, 23, Mizzou, as Dave mentioned. Cole?
I'll defend this one.
You can defend it all. Who's Mizzou paying off to be in the top 25 right now?
Who are they paying off? They're paying off their due of being called overrated by putting on a performance to remember in a loss. That's what they did. That's what they're paying. They're paying off that price. Because here's the deal. We didn't knock Vanderbilt down when we decided to put them in the top 25 in a close call against Texas. So are we not going to do the same thing when Mizzou wakes up and they're down to the wire when it comes to facing off against a team like South Carolina that's ranked ahead of them? I mean, that's my point, is that the version that we saw on Saturday out in Williams-Brice Stadium, that's the version that I envisioned of Mizzou when I figured they would be in the hunt for the college football playoff. That's the vision I think a lot of people have. So when you add all that together, I'm not going to punish them because we've seen other teams not be punished in close calls. So as long as they show up like that against Mississippi State, as long as they show up like that against Arkansas, they're getting more prominent wins, even though it's against lesser tier competition. So I put them in the top 25. I'm not going to knock them out for looking good.
It does help Alabama, though. I will say.
It helps out Texas.
I think it locks Bama in if they went out.
Yeah.
If they went out, it locks them in.
It helps out Texas A&M too. It does.
Yeah.
Because Texas A&M at 15.
I was surprised to see Mizzou still in the top 25. I'm not going to get crazy over it or anything of the sort, but it just seems like we're hanging on week after week to Mizzou, just clinging for dear life in that top 25.
But do y'all agree with it? I think A&M, even if they win this week, beat A&M or beat Texas, and then even losing the SEC championship, I still think they get it.
Well, apparently some people don't.
Well, we'll get there in a second for sure. 22 Iowa State, 21 Arizona State. They got a big one against BYU this weekend. At 20 Tulane, 19 Army. Before we go further, Cole, we were having this conversation off the air. Boise State potentially, let's just say hypothetically, loses a Mountain West Conference championship game. Tulane wins out. Does Tulane get in? Does Army get in if they beat Notre Dame? I'm curious what the shakeup's going to be, what the shakeout's going to be with the G5 representative. I am curious who that team could be if Boise loses.
If you're going to tell me which is the most deserving team, it's Tulane. And the reason it's Tulane is because if they were willing to go play against two Power 4 opponents, they hosted one in Kansas State. They went on the road to Norman, and they nearly took off an SEC team. They've played well. They won their conference championship against, more than likely, especially if Army can win this weekend against Notre Dame, a top 25 Army squad. They've done their job. As long as they continue to win, they belong in. Now, all of this is thrown out the wayside if by some way Tulane loses to Memphis, but then beats Army, and then Boise loses a game, but Boise doesn't lose the Big 12, the Mountain West Championship, well, then they're in the conversation. Like, that's what it is. But if you're asking me simply based off the way that they've looked, and we heard Warren Manuel talk about this, the eye test is going to play a big deal. If we have two loss teams that currently reside in the group of 5 level, I'm taking the one I think looks better. And the one that looks better right now is Tulane, far and away.
No, I would agree with that. I think Tulane's the best group of 5 team.
I want to get to the comments you made about what Warren Manuel had to say in just a second, Cole. 18 South Carolina, much deserved, I think, moving up a few spots. 17 Clemson. That game next weekend is going to be fascinating at Memorial Stadium up there in Clemson. 16 Colorado, 15 Texas A&M. They didn't go anywhere. 14 BYU. They dropped significantly. What did y'all think about the drop? Too little, too much, about right? I mean, it felt like BYU they got punished much more harshly because I think the committee looked at, you've escaped death a few times. You finally got. We're going to hit you even harder than we would have the first time if it would have happened weeks ago. It just seemed like they were kind of waiting to drop that hammer. When it finally happened, they dropped it.
They've been playing with fire a little bit. And I also think, I think we're all human beings, so we're kind of prisoners of the moment. I think it's still. I still think it's a thing, even in a 12-team playoff. The later you lose, the more it hurts you. I don't really think we all say we look.
They remember November, Dave. They remember November.
Yeah, right, wrong, or differently. I just think you are judged that month differently. Whereas, look at Alabama losing in September to Vanderbilt. It's a little more forgiving than it would be now. Like if you swap those games.
Well, because I think, Dave, people believe in the beginning of the season, maybe you're still figuring things out, especially in the portal era, and you got all these new rosters. By now, you are who you are. So it's at least I believe that. You are what you are as a football team by this point. So if you're losing to Kansas, that's kind of who you really are at this point. But think
about this. Kansas also beat Iowa State. So is that really the version of Kansas with 6 losses that we're talking about here? Or is that a Kansas team?
I think teams can get better and worse. I think it goes both ways.
Yeah. Right, but what I'm saying is that right now Kansas has the ultimate chance to play the spoiler 3 different times. Iowa State, BYU, and this week against Colorado. So it's like when we talk about them, but they have 6 losses. This is why I truly believe in the notion you are what your record says you are is a load of crap. Because if some teams aren't guaranteed to play easier schedules to be able to play lesser tier competitions. But when you play against bigger names, when you play on the bright lights, you do show up and deliver. That's Kansas right now. They're fighting for their lives to get to bowl eligibility. But Lance Leipold, outside of those 2 games between Arizona and UNLV, has had Kansas locked in all year. And they really should have beaten Kansas State a few weeks ago, too.
No, I mean, Kansas is a few the ball bouncing in a different way or two from being in the Big 12 title.
They literally, Dave, what's so funny is if they have a few things bounce the way that BYU did, they are where BYU is right now. They're 100% where BYU is right now. So that's the point. My entire message is when you drop down to 14, it's not going to matter because BYU's coming in at number 13. At number 12. So like they're still going to be in. And if both these teams went out, here's what's going to really matter. Does BYU just squeak by every single game until the end of the season? And does Boise State run away with it? So that way Boise State gets the 4 seed and BYU is an at-large bid or an at-large play at the at-large level? Or is BYU running the table? Boise's playing close at the very end. And so they'll reward BYU and put them ahead of Boise State at the end. Like, that's all that matters.
The 5 seed's even more glory than we even imagined heading into the season. Can you imagine Oak playing Boise in the first round, playing BYU in the first round, and then getting Boise in the bye at a neutral site?
The 5 seed is worth its weight in gold.
Better, boys.
It's worth its weight in gold for sure.
Congratulations, Big Ten loser. Congratulations, Big Ten championship game loser.
13, you've got SMU, which they had Rhett Lashley on the show. I think it's very interesting. They mentioned SMU is leading the ACC right now. Miami, of course, the higher of the two. We'll get to the bracket in a second. But getting into the top 12, Boise State at 12, Tennessee 11, Georgia 10, Ole Miss 9, Miami 8, Bama 7, Notre Dame 6, Indiana 5, Penn State 4, Texas 3, Ohio State 2, and Oregon 1. I wanted to run through those really quickly because we're going to go ahead and get the bracket pulled up, the latest college football playoff bracket based on the rankings. And guys, I'll admit I got a little confused when I first watched this because I had to remind myself, because you look at the rankings, Tennessee ranked 11th, but they're the first team out. Yep. And it's because of the whole BYU Boise State thing. They switched positions. Now Boise gets the bye. BYU's now the 12. I kind of had to keep that in mind. Wait a minute. Why is Tennessee that first one out? So, listen, we talked about Tennessee. Their fate is in the hands of the committee. Their fate is in the hands of teams like Notre Dame potentially losing to Army, Ole Miss tripping up, maybe against Florida or Mississippi State, maybe Indiana if they lose by a certain margin of defeat. But, Cole, you mentioned something earlier I wanted to get to. Because as I've told you guys the first 2 weeks that we've done this, I think almost even more interesting or just as interesting as the rankings themselves is what the panel has to say. And tonight it was a guy, Ward Manuel, what he had to say. And I think he straight up told us it's eye test. I think he was very blunt about that. They even asked him, the people on the committee, analytics, strength of schedule, eye test, what do y'all weigh more? What do you think more people on that panel weigh more? Said, we watch the games, man. Like, we watch the ball, which how much film do they really watch? I don't know. I kind of chuckled when they were like, we're in there grinding the film. I'm like, right, okay. But I think they're eye test. I think it's going to come down to eye test, which it may also come down to logo. I think that's what's going to be interesting going through the rest of this thing. But, I mean, I thought his comments were really interesting in regards to – but here's the thing. If it's eye test, I don't know. It's hard. They say one thing, and it's kind of like they do another in these rankings. That's how it feels to me. SEC bias is strong in the top 5, I suppose. 4 of the 5 from the Big Ten. I know I just kind of word vomited there, but I mean, I thought Ward Manuel's comments were interesting. Just the whole eye test thing, and then also talking conference championships.
He was pretty blunt about it.
Yeah, he was very blunt about it.
He was pretty blunt about it. It's going to be an eye test thing. We go back and watch the film, like you said, Chris. They're all going to watch it together. The conference championship week? Yeah.
And he also said they asked us to rank through conference championship week, not to conference championship week. I'll tell you this. I went on record today and said that there's no way that a loser of an SEC title game is going to be penalized and left out. I don't feel as good about that opinion.
I don't at all.
After listening to him, I don't feel as good about that.
It's dumb. It's dumb. It's done. And by the way, I just want to throw this out here. A couple days ago on Sunday Funday, I said something that pissed off people, that made them feel very, very upset, even though I am a big supporter of those out in Knoxville, Tennessee. In fact, I was the only person brave enough to say that Tennessee was going to march on into Athens, Georgia and get a win. I said that they weren't playing like a top 12 team. The eye test is going to be the final boss mode. That is what you look for at the end of the day. And when I look at teams like Alabama and how their defense has turned the corner and how they look on offense, that's top 12 team. When I look at Georgia with the head-to-head win over Tennessee, with the head-to-head win over Kentucky, who has a head-to-head win over Ole Miss, and the way their defense has responded and the way their offense looked, that's top 12 team. If Indiana continues to play at this high-tempo offense and they make this a 4-quarter battle, that's top 12 team. Guys, Tennessee in SEC play with that high potent offense that we were promised underneath Josh Heupel this year is averaging 23.4 points per game. They haven't scored more than 40 this year in SEC competition. That does not feel like a top 12 team. You got to get those style points in the next 2 games. You have to. Because if you do not get those style points, if you do not show what that offense is supposed to look like, you're not getting in. Because the eye test is the last thing. It's not just the chaos behind you. Because there will be some scenario, guys, unfortunately, whether we want to agree with it or not, where Miami balls out down the stretch, SMU wins the ACC, and they say, well, who looks better? Miami at 11-2 or Tennessee at 10-2? Who looks more dominant on both sides of the football? And they may say Miami, and they get the nod of Miami over Tennessee. The eye test is going to be the very last thing. It is. And it was always going to be a problem. And now I want to get to the point that Dave brought up when he said that you feel confident, and Chris says that he does about the SEC runner-up getting in. I don't. And it's wrong, and it's very wrong. Because
you can keep Alabama. I don't see that.
At the end of the day, though, let me ask you guys, bring up the scenario. We're all working on a group project. Every single one of us. 6 people. And Dave and I go get called in the office. We get a 91. All 6 of us get a 91 on the group project. And the teacher tells us, here's the deal. So you guys were the leader of the pack. You guys did such a good job. Dave, you were bringing in the snacks. Cole, you were making sure that everyone was staying on pace. Dave, you were making sure that you brought the PowerPoint together. I'm going to give you a shot for extra credit, but not for this project. For the entire semester, I'm going to raise you by 1 letter grade. But Cole, if Dave does a better job than you, well, this extra credit that you were not promised, that I'm forcing you to do, but you don't have to because it's extra credit, you're going to be penalized and docked 1 full letter grade. And there are people out there that are saying, well, the easiest path for everyone out there right now is for Texas A&M to beat Texas in the Lone Star Showdown, lose to Alabama in the SEC title game, and then you can leave out both Texas and Texas A&M to put in Tennessee and Ole Miss. And at that point, why would Mike Elko, or why would any coach for that matter, want to sign up for that? Why would they want to throw away chances? And people were saying, well, we don't care about winning an SEC or a Big Ten title anymore. Why would you care when your shot of winning a national title hinges on a 3-hour battle of an extra game in the month of December that you were not promised at the start of the year? Why would anybody want to do that and risk that shot?
Well, they don't have a decision. The coaches don't have a decision, though. They have to go play for league purposes. My point is, it's a business thing. It's not about just 1 year, and I think some people forget about that. If they do that to the SEC, Greg Sankey and them are going to leave in about a year or 2 and go do their own damn thing.
They'll bring Tony Petitti too.
I don't. To your point, David. That was the reason I said it earlier today. Like, I don't believe either. I think the precedent it would set to everything Cole's saying, I think is true. The precedent it would set if you punish a team for going to the SEC championship game, essentially, would be a horrific one. And to your point, I think the ripple effect from that, because Greg Sankey and the SEC can pick up their ball and go elsewhere. They don't. I mean, the SEC essentially runs the
Big Ten will be right behind them,
and the Big Ten will be right behind. They run the sport at this point. So, but I will say, I think Texas A&M beating Texas, and then I think they're the only ones where it'd even be a conversation.
If it's fair, yeah.
If it's anybody else,
Alabama gets left out.
No, not a chance.
They lose to Texas and are 3 losses.
Yeah,
come on,
not a chance.
But you're
I don't
okay.
see it.
But boys, you're really gonna sell me right now that a team that lost. Let's just go through it real fast. A team that lost to the runner-up, to the SEC champion, whether that be Georgia, Ole Miss, Alabama, whoever it is, and Notre Dame, both in the playoffs, and a South Carolina team that's going to finish probably 14 or 13 at the end of the day and just miss out. That's not good enough to be in, but we're going to throw in Penn State. But
I agree they are good enough to be in. I think they should be in. I think if you make the SEC title game, you should be in. End of discussion. At
the same time, we're also supposed to trust a committee right now that last year had Georgia ranked number 1 every single step along the way, and then as soon as they lost by 3 points to Alabama, they dropped to 6. We're going to trust the same committee.
That was the pushback.
Who did you want them to be in over?
Who? You mean Texas A&M?
No, last year.
No, Georgia last year.
Georgia to be in over?
Nobody. It's that Georgia should have been 5 and Florida State should have been 6.
Oh, well,
fair enough. They still would have.
No sense.
Yeah. They both still would have been out.
Listen, that was the pushback to your point, Cole, that I got today, and the pushback I gave back was, well, that was a 14 playoff. This is a 12 team. So,
well, yeah, you're not leaving Florida State out in a 12-team playoff at 13.
No, Georgia easily makes the playoffs last year.
Yeah, right, but what I'm saying is that the committee tried to sell us that, a game where you lost by 3 points with a quarterback that we believe could win you a national championship against a team that is led by Nick Saban of all people. Now we're going to drop you to a team that couldn't score a touchdown offensively in the ACC title game against a 4-loss Louisville team. We're going to sell you on that. That's what I'm saying. Like it's just the point of emphasis of there is no structure. There's no criteria. Every single week we make things up and we try to figure out what is the right pathway because if we don't know what the right pathway is. And I get it. It's a dumb argument because of all I'm doing is really arguing apples to oranges or in this point, drunken chaos to the 4 teams that we're always going to get in. Regardless of it, I'm just saying the premises is, are you really taking that Florida State team over that Georgia team in an open field space? And we can prove that because of just 2 years before that, TCU lost in the Big 12 title game, but they went undefeated during the regular year, and they got in over Kansas State that won the Big 12. So it's just the premise of the whole point. Stick to a certain criteria to not make it fit your narrative, to try to make people feel better about themselves. You did that last year to make Florida State feel good that we left you out, but you were right still in the conversation you needed without Jordan Travis. What?
I don't think Florida State felt good either way.
It doesn't matter. What I'm saying is that at least when you make that case, and by the way, Florida State fans want to get mad about the SEC bias. You realize the easiest pathway last year for Florida State to get in was just for Alabama to lose to Georgia. Georgia, Michigan, Florida State, Washington, all undefeated. Easiest pathway to put them all in. But no, Georgia couldn't finish the job either. So stop being mad at the SEC and being mad at the College Football Playoff Committee, even though they were egregiously wrong, because Georgia should have been at number 5. They always should have been at number 5. And now we're trusting the same committee to get the right 12 teams in.
Well, I mean, and you talk about people being mad at the SEC. This is the first week where I really sit back and I'm like, I really actually do think the SEC is getting the shaft a little bit, to be honest with you. I mean, there's no SEC bias here. We're being so unbiased the other way. It's bias. It's Big Ten bias at this point. Again, Cole, your frustration is valid because, yeah, what is the methodology of all this? Is it 12 most deserving? Is it the 12 best? Because if it was 12 best teams, blow up the whole list and start over. Because like if it's 12 best, Indiana, if you lose this weekend, you're out. I don't give a shit if it's by 3, by 7. You've played one of the worst schedules in the country. You've beaten nobody. You are not one of the 12 best teams. Miss me with that. Then Indiana would get blasted by every SEC team behind them. Penn State, same thing, would get drugged.
I don't think
Notre Dame would get drugged. Like,
I'll say this.
Who are we kidding?
I don't know if Tennessee is.
Wait, what do you mean about Tennessee?
A top 12 team.
They're not playing like it right now.
Yeah,
they aren't.
Yeah,
no, don't get me wrong. In my rankings, they're number 11.
If it was about 12 best teams, there wouldn't even be a G5 team in here. Come on. Give me a break.
You would have Texas A&M in. You would probably you would have Miami in. You would
South Carolina be knocking on the door at least.
You would at least put them at number 12, I think, right now. And that's fair. South Carolina, the way they played.
Miami, South Carolina went to go. If you were legitimately doing the 12 best in the year, yeah, I mean, South Carolina would be going into Clemson with a real shot to get there.
No, let's just also call a spade a spade. You probably would leave Penn State in at number 11, South Carolina in at number 12, at number 10, and Texas A&M at number 12. The only non-SEC or Big Ten team that would have been in is more than likely Miami. That's it. That would be it. But also at the same time, if you're going to make that case about Indiana, and I know that we're an SEC show, but let's just go ahead and bring this up. If you want to make that case about Indiana, what is the reason why? Let me ask you, what separates Indiana and Penn State? What does? What's Indiana? I mean, what's the selling point for Penn State?
We talked about it off air. There's no difference. I mean,
what's the selling point?
Common opponents, especially if Indiana goes and plays well and loses this week. They have the common opponent in UCLA. Indiana defeated by a higher margin of victory. Only thing you would probably have is the Penn State strength of schedule and the better win. But I would say they have the better win over Illinois. I'll say that. But I'm not opposed to putting Indiana above Penn State if they go lose a close game in Columbus, because they have handled business against other teams. I'll say that outside of the Michigan game.
They have a top 15 offense in every single metric. They have a top 60 defense in every single metric. And more importantly, what's the calling card for Penn State? We didn't get boat raced by Ohio State. Okay, so if Indiana loses by 10 points, let me ask you guys this. Just humor me, because I know there's people out there talking about if Indiana loses, Chris Phillips being one of them. If they lose, then you know what? They don't belong in the college football playoff. Well, what if they beat the spread? Because Penn State didn't beat the spread. Penn State was a 5.5 point underdog. They didn't beat the spread. Ohio State covered. But what if Indiana covers and they're both 11-1? Wouldn't that mean that they played better against the opponent? And by the way, Penn State had them at home. Penn State had them in Happy Valley. Indiana's got to go travel to the shoe. You're going to tell me
how do you feel about Indiana if they lose by 3 touchdowns?
Then that's a fine point to go ahead and have an argument if you want to keep them out. That's a fine point. I'm not gonna sit here and go tit for tat with that. What I'm gonna sit there is that if Indiana loses by say 3 points, you're really gonna tell me that nope, don't belong. Because it's not their fault that Michigan didn't hold up its end of the bargain, Washington didn't hold up its end of the bargain, Nebraska didn't hold up its end of the bargain, Purdue didn't hold up its end of the bargain. The only thing that they could have done that would have made them a better team is there was a conversation that potentially they could have scheduled Louisville as a non-conference game instead of Western Illinois. Besides that, that's it. You get the schedule that you're dealt. It's how you respond with that schedule.
The Big Ten didn't give them premier games because they probably didn't think they were going to be very good in the first year. So they probably we'll give them a couple that they need. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't like Purdue was highly preseason ranked. I mean, there's no denying it. It wasn't like they had a bunch of top 6 teams in the Big Ten projected to be on their schedule, and they just weren't very good. But I'm with you. I mean, it's not their fault. I think the Big Ten just was like, this will be a mid-tier.
It's like the same, but like it's the same argument with Texas right now. Listen, I'm not saying that Texas, if they're 10-2, should get in. In fact, I'm going to be completely real, and I know that we have a big Texas fan base. You shouldn't get in if you're 10-2. You're the one that I would leave out.
A&M. Your best win's Vanderbilt. And then maybe Colorado.
I was going to go there, Cole, with the pushback or the other perspective on Indiana. It's just some of these other Big Ten teams. I can see it because, again, the pushback is the same for Texas. I mean, all is fair, right? So you are right. I mean, I would agree, and I've mentioned this multiple times this week, that, yeah, if Texas, and looking ahead to next weekend, if they lose to Texas A&M, I think you can't be upset when you're left out. Texas, you control your own destiny. I mean, that's the thing.
Remember what he said. Let's say this right now. Who would y'all take on a neutral field right now if they played Texas, Tennessee?
I take Texas.
I would too. That's why, and they keep saying the eye test. But I will say this: the resume won't be there, and it'll be. We just mentioned it. You remember the losses from November. It's very late in the year. I mean, it's the last game of the year. People are gonna, unless it's some. We brought it up to Zay on Texas Sports Unfiltered. Remember, Chris? Unless it's some wild 8 overtime, like 2018 LSU A&M
bad call at the end of the game.
Yeah, where it was just like, dude, both those teams should be in.
But then then you're going to get in the position to where, in this hypothetical, if A&M goes to the championship game, if A&M lost by 28 to say in Alabama, and then are you really going to say, well, we're going to put Texas in anyways because they kind of got jobbed against A&M. But it's like, we just watched the game and they lost.
I don't see how you could do that a week later.
Yeah, but guys,
or they're both out in that scenario.
But here's my argument. Again, we're going to punish Texas even if they look like a top 12 team because of their resume. Like, it's the same argument that I have with Indiana. If they lose by, let's just humor me for a minute. Let's say if they lose by 3 points. to A&M in College Station. And let's say Vanderbilt beats Tennessee. Well, Tennessee's out. Done deal. No more questions about it. But now we have to go say the exact same thing that we're saying about Indiana. And there's a spot open. Are we going to put in SMU? We're going to put in Miami if they don't look like a top 12 team, even though we know that Texas at its peak has looked like a top 12 team this year. That's the difference. Like, that's where I come from when it comes to saying about Indiana. Indiana, when it's at its peak, looked like a top 12 team, and that's where the eye test plays a big deal into it. So I'm not saying that Texas can't control its own destiny. You, me, Dave, we all know that if they just win out and they go to Atlanta at 11-2, they're not being left out of the college football playoff. So just make it a moot point to begin with. But I'm just bringing up, are we going to punish teams for not having good schedules because of opponents that they were initially planned on playing didn't hold up their end of the bargain? That's it.
But I'll say this too, Gold. I think everyone knew Indiana and Texas had a hard or easy schedule going into it. So I don't think it was some like I said, I don't think it was like Florida's schedule going into the year, and it was like, man, all those teams they're supposed to play in November just did not turn out to be good teams.
You know what? I want to say something. What just hit me? What feels so ass backward to me is we're spending, and everybody is, we're spending so much time arguing about, and I'm going to lump Texas in this too, but about these teams, say 3 through 6, that have essentially played nobody, and we're trying to like play hypotheticals and like talk about what their ratings are and like they're top of this, they're this. Dude, I've watched Georgia on the field play some of the best teams in the country,
right,
and whoop their ass. I've seen Ole Miss play said Georgia, whoop their ass. I've seen Alabama beat their. I'm like, I have proof of concept that these teams, they're not perfect, but they're elite. It almost feels like we should be having the conversation about, like, I almost feel like we should switch these blocks, because I'm like, you might be undefeated, but you've proven nothing. Like, I agree. It feels ass backwards.
We should be arguing like 9 through 12.
It feels ass backwards to me. Like, you want to know what feels ass backwards? The fact Texas is 3 and a Georgia that beat their skulls in on their field are sitting at number.
But are you not going to put?
And I know they've lost other games. I'm just saying though, like, it feels icky to me, to be honest. Like, these teams have played tough games and they've lost some, and they're just so punished for it. I get it, but I don't know. It just feels weird to me. It feels weird.
I'm just saying, if you're going to listen, I'm not going to sit here and act like that Ole Miss doesn't have a bad loss on its resume, because if they have it to Kentucky, it's a bad loss. It's a bad loss.
Terrible loss. And
you could say kind of the exact same thing when it comes to Alabama versus Vanderbilt, simply because of, even though Vanderbilt's not a terrible, terrible, terrible loss, it still is a loss where you go back and you remember what First Bank Stadium is. It's 90% visiting team. It is. So it's like almost somewhat of a home game, and they had their struggles against South Carolina and they lost to Tennessee. But I am going to sit here and say at the same time, it does have to matter at some point. It does. You can't look that awful against Ole Miss and then be rewarded because you beat Texas by 15. Like, that's where the problem resides. And it's why right now, because of and I get it, but this also goes back to a bigger picture, Chris, and it goes back to a bigger picture, Dave. Did you not think that this was going to become a problem when you went to expansion? That eventually teams were going to show you that on one bad weekend, maybe that's who they are versus who they actually are? And now we have to go into these tiebreaker scenarios about who gets in where it would have been a simpler process if we didn't have to worry about what Oregon was doing because they were in the Pac-12, or Texas was doing because if they were in the they were in the Big 12. Because it would have been a solved equation, and we would have had actual teams that are being penalized for losing a game to a lesser tier opponent when we know that they're better than advertised. It was always going to happen. Meet the rest of the college football world. This was always going to collide because they wanted more money. And now they want more money, and now they want more money for the conferences. You have to find out the proper solution. That way the right 12 teams get in. But this is on you guys.
I'm all right with the eye test, honestly. Sprinkled in with a little bit of, you got to have a resume from a Texas perspective. I think you got to use some common sense from the resume perspective.
You know what stands out to me is like just schedule imbalancing. I don't know if that's even a solvable thing, but
no, not once you did away with divisions.
Yeah, see that, because it's just.
Think about it. I mean, I hate me and Cole going back and forth about this. We say, I mean, it's the same schedule next year. I mean, to be fair, as we would go into next year, Texas would have another.
Assuming everything is, yeah.
But like at the same time, do me a favor. Texas loses to Texas A&M. Are you still saying that they're not one of the top 12 best teams?
No, Cole, I think it's a fair point, honestly, because like I said, I brought up a question I just literally asked both of y'all right now. Indiana, Texas, who would you take on a neutral field?
Texas. Everyone would.
Texas.
Everyone would.
I mean, everyone except probably Oregon, Ohio State. At that point, you could probably throw Alabama, Georgia in there, and even I think they could beat them on a given day too. Notre Dame, they would beat. I mean, yeah, the group of 5 team.
Notre Dame versus Ole Miss. Who are you taking on a neutral field? Both have a crappy loss. Ole Miss, far and away. Everyone's taking Ole Miss far and away. I mean,
guys, again, the reason this conversation and the beauty is in the banter is so beautiful with this is because I heard Danny Cannell say something today that he essentially said that there should be kind of like I don't mean to put words in his mouth, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially said everything should be equal for everyone the way we weigh everything. But it's like, bro, it just can't be because we all know the SEC and the Big Ten are the best conferences, and the SEC is the best. We know it's the best. SEC bias exists because we have years and years of track record of the SEC kicking everybody's ass. It can't be equal.
That's why they say
it can't be equal. I know people hate to hear that, but it's not equal. It can't be equal. It shouldn't be equal.
You know what's really frustrating, too, is that there's people out there that will say, well, it's unfair when you say, oh, let's just drop them in a different conference. Because then what you're doing is you're saying that they're not going to get the same type of players because if you just drop them in a different conference, then that just means they're going to not have the big SEC logo attached to their name. No, I'm saying drop this exact team. This team. The one that is built for 2024. Drop that in a different conference. What's their resume? With the players that are currently on their roster. That's what I'm talking about. And when you bring it up and you look at a South Carolina or you look at an Ole Miss or you look at even an Indiana for that instance or you look at maybe a Penn State for that instance in a negative connotation, what is their record when they play in the ACC or when they play in the SEC or they play in the Big 12? Because I'll tell you what, South Carolina is not only winning the ACC, there's not even a conversation. It's more so who do they get to kick the ass of in Charlotte in a couple weeks? That's what I'm talking about. You talk about LSU. LSU has such high expectations because they've earned that right because of the branding that they've had since Nick Saban was there, the way they've invested the resources and the allocation. But if you put that same name and that same brand in the ACC and they were 11-1, nobody would bat an eye. Nobody would complain if they were 10-2 because it still would be good enough to probably get into the conference championship. So it's like, that's why we say there is a clear distinction and separation between the SEC and insert second conference here. Because of the level of talent, you're being penalized for playing tougher games. And then you're saying to yourself, oh, but people say that we need to schedule a 9th game, a 9th conference game. Fine. If you want the SEC to schedule a 9th conference game, make them play more tougher competition, add another top 25 matchup to the resume. I'm okay with it. You are also guaranteeing that 2 teams automatically, even if they're 9-3, are going into the playoff over a Big 10, an SEC, or a Big 12 school. You are. Because of when you have to play the ranked matchups, and we did the math over the summer, there is a 42% success rate higher of SEC teams winning top 25 matchups in their own conference than Big 10 teams have it, than Big 12 teams have it, than ACC teams have it. There's a reason why the SEC, up until last year, won every single college football playoff, almost every season. And if it wasn't them, it was Clemson. It was always just them. The Southeastern region had it because that's where the talent is. It's always there. Wake up, smell the coffee, get a couple slaps in the face, and accept that this is why we talk about the SEC in the light that we do. It has nothing to do with the fact that we don't appreciate college football. It has everything to do with the fact that we appreciate great matchups. And great matchups occur on Saturdays. And because they occur on Saturdays, they're cut out of the college football playoff conversation.
Yeah, I mean, the SEC's earned its reputation for a reason. Nobody made that up. I mean, it's going back to 2006.
Guys, the rankings specifically, we've spent a lot of time talking about the maybe the methodology to get there. But thoughts on the movement this week? I think you made a good point, Dave, or I'll get your thoughts, Cole. I thought that, the order of Bama, Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, I don't have any problem with that. I thought it was interesting. Bama moved up 3 spots after they beat Mercer. Granted, this had something to do with BYU losing, right? Yeah. But, yeah, Bama jumping 3 spots was interesting, to say the least. Not surprised to see Georgia obviously back in the top 12. Ole Miss kind of stayed put. I mean, again, guys, back to the whole 12 best. I mean, I'm still kind of like I'm still skeptical of Miami. The honest truth. I know they got Cam Ward.
My thing is, it'll be interesting if they just totally go the eye test 12 best, just the last one. It's just like we're just going off record for the first. For
because it's I hear Reese Davis saying this during the show. He's like only 2 more of these until we get the one that actually matters, and I'm like, are they just treating this as it just doesn't mean anything and we're all just reacting for nothing? And the last one, they're just going to throw it out there and we're going to be like, this is nothing like what we saw because the other ones didn't matter.
You mean the fact that they got paid for their rating? The fact that they got their rating shocking. No, they got the 4 right. I mean, in the order, I would say. And I think that you also got to give credit people who are complaining. Well, what about Miami? Why are they ranked below Alabama? Miami didn't play this past week. Alabama did. I mean, I can just use that as the example.
They beat up on the Mercer Bears, baby.
One team
played. 9-1 Mercer Bears squad there.
I didn't know that.
Hey, you want to talk playoffs? We'll go look at the FCS playoff bracket here.
Look at where Mercer is.
I didn't know that.
But seriously, do me a favor. Look at the last thing that we have to go off of when it comes to Alabama. Alabama got a dominant win. I don't care if it was against an FCS opponent, but it's
playoff worthy team.
It's recency. Listen, if recency bias ever played a factor, it is certainly this week because there are Miami fans saying, how does Alabama jump us? The last visual memory we have of you is losing to Georgia Tech. The last visual memory we have of Alabama is dominating and Austin Mack is playing in the 4th quarter. That's why you get the nod. That's why they got it. And I get it. I have no problem with that with Ole Miss. I have no problem with Georgia where they are. It's fair because if you have to respect head-to-heads. And unfortunately, what do you do with Tennessee? It is what it is. That's where eye test, I think, comes into mind. And based off of eye test, is anybody arguing Alabama, Georgia, and Ole Miss are playing better than Tennessee with 2 losses?
And I would say this. They made a good point. Eye test can't mean everything forever. It's because what is it? Going back to the top 25, it was SMU at 13 and BYU at 14, and BYU beat them, correct?
Yeah.
Beat SMU. So it's like it can't always be just – I understand it can't always just be head-to-head. So that, to your point, that's where eye test comes in. And that's why Tennessee is where they are. And I know for Tennessee fans, Vol fans watching, I get it. It is a sickening feeling to see that Alabama team in that bracket and know we beat that Alabama team. We beat them. Head-to-head, we beat them. So
you did. But then Bama also ran a train on that Georgia team in the first half that you got beat by.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. When we get into these tight 2-loss, like 5-16 tiebreaker. Let me word this correctly. Head-to-head matters. I'm not saying it doesn't matter anymore. It's just not weighted as heavily when you have so many teams involved. Because you could play, like Cole saying, that circle of Tennessee beat Alabama, and Alabama's sitting there like, well, then if we're going to play that game, Georgia's out. Like, and Georgia's like, well, why are we out? We beat Tennessee. Like, you just go in circles, and like at some point you got to go.
And then Georgia's looking up like, what about those guys? Texas, they're pointing at them. We beat them.
I was looking at the SEC schedules today, guys. You know who's going to lose these opponent winning percentage tiebreakers, right? If you played Mississippi State, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt, if you played all 3 of them, you have no shot at winning that because who's in that time? Mississippi, Tennessee played all 3 of them.
Yep.
Am I missing?
Texas played all 3 of them.
Texas played all 3, and we're sitting here talking about it. Could be those 2 teams sitting there like, all right, Texas or Tennessee, who we putting in here, guys?
Which UT is getting in the playoff?
Which UT?
No, I think that the other point is really poignant here. If you're Tennessee, number one, and I've already brought this up when it comes to South Carolina, stop worrying about the playoff. Control what you can control. but sure as hell be polling as hard as humanly possible for America's team, the Black Knights, when they are at Yankee Stadium against Notre Dame, because it opens up a path. And honestly, that might be enough, because at the end of the day, if Indiana does beat, here's the problem also. If Indiana does beat Ohio State, you know who's not being left out? Ohio State. But if Indiana loses to Ohio State, now we have to have that conversation. So instead of wondering about what will happen in that matchup, and if Indiana truly belongs, control your path this weekend against UTEP, ball out against Vanderbilt next week on the road in Nashville, and hope to God that Notre Dame drops one to either Army in Yankee Stadium or next weekend at USC, because that might be your best case scenario. But you also have to do the work. That is the most important part that I think a lot of people seem to forget about when looking at these rankings. The eye test is eventually going to be a factor. It may not be the only factor, but it is going to be a factor. And a lot of us are looking at
subjective.
What?
I agree with you. I said we're all human beings. You're going to take that into effect.
And I'm sorry, but like, we aren't talking enough about SMU, and SMU is currently the betting favorite to be the winner of the ACC, yet they're on the outside looking in. And I personally think that SMU is playing better football than Miami is right now. And so the eye test is going to matter because of that reason too.
Cole, I just want Tennessee fans to be out there. Well, obviously, you got to take care of business against those Miners from UTEP this Saturday. Then you got to go play Vanderbilt. What time is that game? It's a noon Eastern. That's a morning game. Chris has been there, sleepy, could be scary. But at 7 o'clock at night on Saturday, this Saturday, when Army plays Notre Dame,
you need to be at the bar pulling for the damn Army.
The Vol fans need to be playing this jam. Let me pull it up for you.
And we can hear it.
Up. Stay with me, people.
Incoming.
Got to be cheering for the Army Black Knights, baby.
I mean, listen, we all are pulling for Army. We all want as much SEC representation as possible.
I'm going to be completely real. Texas fans, you should be pulling for Army too, because you're in the same boat. You kind of are in the same boat.
Just in case, right? Just in case.
A&M fans, you should be pulling for Army. Everyone in the SEC should be rallying.
Real American. Yep, you're right. Texas, Tennessee fans got to be all on board, baby.
Because you can't worry about teams like Ole Miss, what happens if they lose to Florida? Because what if they also boat race Florida? You can't worry about what happens if BYU loses to Arizona State, because it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. You can't matter about what happens if Maryland beats Penn State. You have to worry about what you can control. And people don't understand. When I say style points, I'm not saying make the one-handed grab at the back of the end zone, toe tap it on in to get on SportsCenter top 10. Style points can be playing keep away from a high-tempo offense for 7 minutes. That way they never see the ball back. Style points can be forcing a turnover on every single third down, and a team that's known for converting is going 18%. Style points is being able to win the time of possession in every single quarter. That's style points. It's showing that you are one of the 12 most complete teams in the sport. Because if you do that, it leaves less room for margin for them to pick at. You know who I'm not picking at right now if they win out? Ole Miss. Because Ole Miss has shown me at their peak, they are one of the 12 most dominant teams. You know who I'm not picking at right now? Oregon. Because Oregon has shown me at their peak, they can be one of the 12 most dominant teams. Georgia, same thing. Alabama, same thing. I can make an argument at the same time for Indiana at its peak can look like one of the 12 best teams. You have to look like it because your schedule is going to do part of it. The resume is going to do part of it. The strength of conference is going to do part of it. And that last sliver is going to be, can I go out and ball against any one of the 11 motherfuckers ahead of me? That's what it's going to come down to. That's what it is.
Here's a question. I want to pose to both y'all. I presented my rankings last night. I want y'all to rank the 6 playoff contenders. I'm sorry, South Carolina fans. I'm talking about the 1 to 2 loss playoff contenders here. That's not even a shot. It's just so we don't sit here all day and talk about it. I ranked mine last night. The ceilings of these teams when they're playing at their very best, like when you think like this is the best Ole Miss can be right here in my head, this is where I rank them going 1 through 6. Ole Miss, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and then rank their floors where you think the worst of them. You're like, yeah, on their worst day, that's where I probably have them ranked in the 6.
Okay.
That's a lot of math, but I'm going to try to figure this out on the fly.
All right, so just go in order. Chris, who's your number 1?
I'd go Ole Miss.
Ole Miss is number 1 for me too for ceiling. Number
That's
2.
who I had.
Number 2, I think I'd go Georgia.
I'd go Georgia.
I went Texas.
Okay. Number 3,
Texas.
Texas.
I went Alabama.
Number 4,
Yeah, Bama.
Bama.
I have Georgia.
Number 5.
So it's between Tennessee and A&M for this spot.
Yes.
Right.
That's actually a really good question.
I went Tennessee.
Tennessee.
On the best day because of the
Yeah, on their best day. Okay, I'd go Tennessee. Yeah.
Number 6 is A&M.
and then
So Chris
A&M.
and I, you and I, the exact same.
floor. Cole, lead us off.
Floor for me would be the number 1 who has the lowest.
Who has the highest floor?
Oh,
The-
Highest floor.
Georgia, hands down.
You are gonna
Actually, no. Texas.
You are going to be baffled by mine.
Texas is the highest floor, I think.
That's who I had. I had Texas as the
Texas.
highest floor.
Texas is the highest floor.
That's it, Chris.
Yeah, I'd go Texas. Yeah.
All
Two,
number
Georgia.
2, Cole.
Georgia.
I went Ole Miss.
I'd go Ole Miss too. I think they're actually more complete.
And I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about how I
Yeah,
kind of feel.
yeah.
All right, 3.
I'll go Georgia 3.
I'll go Ole Miss at 3.
I had 3. See, I have Georgia at 4 in ceiling and floor. I just do those offensive line injuries and the injuries at the receiver spot, running back.
I also include coaching, and I think that you have an ace in the hole when it comes to Kirby Smart.
Well done,
Fair.
Cole. Well done.
All right, so 4 for me. I would go probably Bama still.
Yeah, Bama. Yeah.
See, 5, I have A&M, and then 6, I have Tennessee.
So 5, I would have A&M, and 6, I would have Tennessee as well. I think
Yeah,
Tennessee,
I think Tennessee has the lowest floor out of the 6 playoff teams.
but they have a higher ceiling than Texas A&M.
By 1 spot. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
but
flip-flop them.
Again, for me, when it comes down to Tennessee has too many self-inflicting wounds that they do to themselves because they don't play consistent 4-quarter football offensively or even consistent weekly football offensively. Whether it be Nico Iamaleava missing wide receivers or wide receivers dropping balls or the inability to create pass protection or the inability to win on 3rd down, they're just all over the place when it comes to their offense. And it's a shame because they have a great rushing attack and they have one of the best, if not the best defensive line that nobody talks about at the high end level. And they have a pretty good secondary. And then you have to realize everyone's allowed 1. Everyone is. Like, I knew going into that matchup last week, there was a shot that Carson Beck would turn into Carson Mahomes, as we all figured he does once a year. I didn't know if it was going to happen against Tennessee, but I knew in the back of my mind it could. When you finish with over 400 yards of offense and 3 touchdowns, guess what? That's what happens. So it's like, I'm not going to look at the entire body of work from Tennessee this year and say, no, they're a bad team because if Carson Beck went off on them and he didn't go off against Texas and he didn't go off against Bama and he didn't go off against Ole Miss. I'm going to look at that game as an outlier because if I know that Carson Beck is guaranteed to have one of these performances once per game.
Is it weird for y'all, Tennessee, too? I mentioned this, I think, in our preview when we did Tennessee, Georgia, Chris, and then even going into that Mississippi State game. The rushing numbers weren't bad for Tennessee's rushing defense last week against Georgia. But remember, the 2 weeks prior against Kentucky and Mississippi State, the run defense was trending. Like, it was getting worse each week. And they didn't have a great overall. It wasn't bad last week, but it wasn't. Again, and they would tell you, look, we held Kentucky to Mississippi State under 20 points. That's all that matters. 100% right. All it matters is holding teams to points. But when, again, you're just nitpicking a really good defense. You're just trying to see trends on if they're getting better or what kind of worse. And I think it's fair to say.
I mean, I think a Georgia offense.
Minimally, I think they have been getting a little worse in a very minimal way, just very minimal since we've gotten later in the year. It's not big. I just think a little bit.
I mean, Dave, to your point, it's Tennessee didn't play poorly against Georgia, but watch them in person. I mean, a Georgia offensive line that had been struggling mightily, I thought at times, not all the time, but at times whipped them. At times. I mean, they brought the punch to Tennessee. Also, I didn't hear James Pierce's name a whole lot in that game. Like it was, I thought Georgia did a pretty good job of neutralizing one of the better front sevens in the conference. Guys, we talked about, too, the eye test when it comes to the Vols. One of the reasons they have not passed the eye test level we expected. Our good friend Brad Crawford posted this stat. Nico Iamaleava has 6 touchdown passes. 6 touchdown passes in games against SEC competition this season. The only SEC starting quarterback with fewer in the same number of games, which is 7. The only starting SEC quarterback with fewer in the same number of games is Kentucky's Brock Vandagriff with 4.
Yep.
So Dylan Sampson has carried them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's just it's not as flashy and sexy. It hasn't been sexy. That's the problem. That's the problem for Tennessee when it comes to IT.
Yeah, and to Cole's point, I think Cole had a great point. Georgia's ceiling floor can be adjusted because I do think that coaching staff gives them an advantage with their ability to adjust. And I hate to say this for our Tennessee listeners, but I kind of feel a little bit of the opposite of that for Tennessee a little bit. Like, again, Cole and Chris both heard me complaining all year. Better slow down the carries on Dylan Sampson. You gotta make sure he gets through the season because no one's developed as an RB2 yet. Well, the one game you decide not to ride him is the biggest one of the year against Georgia, and I just do not understand that. Like, it's baffling at times. Like, he had his lowest carries in league play in the biggest game, and I don't know. I think
you also kind of saw
athletes. Joel Clapp brought it up, and I sent that video to y'all with me and Graham Coffey talking about it 2 years ago. That there's a ceiling, I think, to Tennessee high point. It could be 11 wins. It could be 10 wins. I just think that offense can be figured out if they're playing on the same level of athlete across the field from them. I think they take advantage of when they get to play lesser athletes at times, like the Kentucky, Mississippi States. I don't know. I'm with y'all a little bit. I haven't seen the eye test with Tennessee.
We should have talked about that too, Dave, going in the UTEP game. I mean, why doesn't Tennessee just sit Sampson?
Why? Because they need. Because
let him rest.
Honestly, let him rest for 150 yards in the first quarter, and then sit him the rest of the game. He's going to go untouched on 2 runs.
Fair enough. Guys, let's take a look at these matchups really quickly. Ohio State, BYU in your first round matchup. 3 SEC teams in the other 3 first-round games traveling on the road to cold weather destinations. Bama at Notre Dame, Georgia at Penn State, Ole Miss at Indiana. Which of those 3 first-round matchups would intrigue you the most? And just thoughts on the SEC, the 3 real big boys, or 3 of the big boys going on the road.
Dude, I'm a sucker for helmet games. Bama going to South Bend that'd give you warm, fuzzy feelings.
Yeah,
I will say, depending on what version of the defense we're going to get from Indiana, it's going to be a shootout in Bloomington for Ole Miss and Indiana. That would be a game to where you will see haymakers from deep shots and Curtis Rourke and from Jackson Dart. I will be very.
Well, Joey Galloway, that'll be his first game back, so Curtis Rourke will have about 3 or 4 weeks to get off his.
Yeah. Apparently, he'll have time. Which, by the way, because they'll just win the Oaken bucket at that point, they'll be fine in that matchup. Now, I'm also not going to lie. I'll be really interested to see which quarterback can deliver in a bigger primetime spot. Drew Aller or Carson Beck, especially with it being in Happy Valley in the cold weather. Because of, yes, we can talk about how we're going to look at what Carson Beck did last week, but I'm also going to say that there have been moments where Drew Aller has not still lived up to the expectation, even underneath Andy Kotelnicki, but he also doesn't have the same type of wide receivers, which again, we can say that there's been some disappointment at wide receiver play for Georgia this year. But I do wonder who could step up in that big time matchup. I really do.
I feel like Alabama fans have got to look at this and be like, hey, if we can win the SEC title game, let's do it. Because having to go through Oregon to get to a national championship is not the ideal path.
I was about to ask you that. Who has the easiest path to the national championship of the 3? Of the 3 SEC squads.
Of the 3 SEC teams.
Now I'm gonna throw this in. You also have to include every matchup along the way.
So you're saying Ole Miss, Georgia, Bama, Cole?
Yes.
I'd say Georgia.
Yeah, I'd say Georgia too.
I think Bama, personally.
With Oregon?
If that's the version of Oregon that we're seeing that's starting to decline. The one that we saw.
You're being a day trader.
If that's the version. Listen.
You got to get the Buckeyes, too.
They were get the Buckeyes. That was their 8th straight game before a bye week this week. I'll give them a little bit. I'll give them.
You in Oregon?
Yeah.
Fine. Okay.
They played 8 straight conference, or 8 straight conference games. They had a bye week before the.
But also, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Let's consider Ole Miss. If we all think that Ole Miss has a higher ceiling than Texas, or we all think they have a higher floor than Texas, they already have the head-to-head win against Georgia. Can they do it again? I mean, I'm just saying. Can they do it again?
Beating Kirby Smart twice, man.
It's hard. It's almost impossible. You won't pull the wool over the goat's eye twice.
No, man. I mean, what do you think? What do y'all think? Who would you pick right now in a rematch, neutral site?
No, Georgia.
I mean, Dave, who would you go with neutral site rematch?
Georgia, Ole Miss.
Yeah.
You know, it's great. I go Ole Miss.
Yeah.
I go Ole Miss.
I mean, if we're talking about if I'm getting real excited in my head, I want to feel a little risky tonight, I'd probably go Ole Miss. But if my life was on the line, I would go Georgia.
Yeah,
give me Darth Vader to save my life.
I'd go back to my thought process with the Tennessee game this past weekend, where it's like, well, I know I saw with my own two eyes what Ole Miss did. I know the personnel, but that motherfucker Kirby Smart, bro, I'm not going against him in a rematch. I am not going against Kirby in a rematch, man. I can't do it. I just can't do it. So
let me ask you guys real fast. Do you think that this solves itself out to where we're either going to get 5 teams in from the SEC, or we are going to see somebody drop the ball, allowing Tennessee to sneak their way back in?
Like, just in general, does Tennessee get in, you think?
Well, either Tennessee gets in and there's 4 teams in, or Tennessee gets in and there's 5 teams in.
I think there's going to be chaos. Yeah, dude, if this season's taught us anything, there's going to be some unexpected results down the stretch where somebody loses that wasn't supposed to. Heck, there might be an SEC team that does that. What if Tennessee loses to Vandy?
That's what I'm saying.
Let's not act like that's out of the question. I mean, that's very much within the realm of possibility. So
Ole Miss loses to Florida.
I mean, it's
Bama loses to Oklahoma.
A&M could lose to Auburn this weekend, and it's a total moot point with them. That would be something. That would be something. And I did actually get asked about that hypothetical. If A&M were to lose to Auburn but beat Texas, then what? I just think they're both out. Pretty simple.
If they were, because Texas, neither one can go to the SEC championship game.
Right.
So then that's an easy way to put them both out.
Yeah, I think if you're for Texas folks, and again, you mentioned Cole, a lot of Texas folks tune in. We appreciate every single one of you, and we're excited to get to Austin this weekend. And I've been asked about that a lot by Texas folks. You just got to look at the A&M game as the eliminator. You do. I mean,
oh, I think so.
You have no leg to stand on if you don't win the game.
And I think an objective person who even wore the brightest burnt orange glasses would tell you that's fair.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's fair as well. Guys, before we get out of here, I want to ask y'all one last thing. So the third set of rankings and projected bracket is out, and we have a few more of these before the final one. Through 3 set of rankings, based off what you've learned, what would you change about the 12-team playoff going into 2025 if you were in control of it? I'll start with this. I would get rid of automatic qualifiers.
Yes.
I would. If we're going to go 12 best, open it wide open. I don't give a damn what conference you're from. I don't give a damn your affiliation. We're not doing that. We're going to go 1 through 12. This is how we rank them. This is who's going. I would get rid of the qualifiers.
Yeah, no, I would too. You took mine. That's the one I would go on, and then
that's probably the most obvious.
If we're getting real excited, I personally would go like the NFL model and play. Hey, we're playing all games on campus until the national championship game. They won't do that because of sponsors for bowl games giving up money. They won't do that, but that would be awesome.
Yeah,
I will go a step further, and it goes against everything that I believe in. Everything that I believe in.
Just tell me you'd expand it, Cole, even more.
I'd expand it. I'd expand it. No one gets a first round bye. No one gets a first round bye.
Those 4, 9, and 3 teams getting in, baby.
I'm not for it. I'm not. What I'm not for.
He's a hypocrite, man. Last week he was campaigning against it.
What I'm not for is Miami getting a first round bye while Alabama, Georgia, and Ole Miss have to now travel on the road to a winter environment, and they get to go play when their worst loss is at the same level as some of the losses that the other 2 teams have. Also, the other thing that I would change, have a legit criteria of what you're looking for in the playoffs. That way teams know what to expect going into this every single week, what they have to do to guarantee their spot. Have a set criteria, not just, it's just eye test. It's just strength of reference. Give direct.
My answer to this, or my question to you, Cole, would be, how do you quantify eye test?
How do you quantify eye test? That's what I'm saying. Set criteria, because that's what we're dealing with right now. Tennessee is on the outside looking in, and none of us are arguing that Tennessee right now belongs inside after the performance that they had against Georgia. But what I am saying is, if Tennessee is now trying to find a way to get back in, and there is chaos that can happen, what is the criteria? What's the criteria for making sure that SMU doesn't catapult us? What's the criteria to make sure that we're able to do the best for us to keep in? Or more importantly, if I'm Texas, what do I have to do over these next games to where my schedule isn't as prominent as, say, a Georgia or an Alabama or an Ole Miss or a South Carolina or a Missouri or whoever it is that year? What do I have to do to guarantee I've shown enough that I am going to stay in the playoff, even if I do drop a game late in the year?
See, I think if we want specific criteria, I think this is where I'm kind of at with the eye test. If it's eye test heavy, I'm cool with a committee. Like, would I really like a lot of true football people on it, and us actually like maybe give a test and maybe people
Dave, we need some ball knowers. We need some ball knowers.
And then Ghost was like, I hate that comment. I was like, you see what I commented to him? I was like, don't get Chris started. I complain about it.
We need some ball knowers.
The people listening, that's what I hate the term the most. If you say you don't know ball or you are a ball knower, you probably are not a ball knower. If you're out there having to say
incoming the ball knower comments.
But my point being, if we're going to have a committee, and I think we could do something cool where like get people on there that are interested in being on the committee, and maybe you let the people vote. We do some kind of criteria, get the right people on there. Because I think if we have a committee, it's subjective. We have 13 people on it. Eye test is going to be weighted heavily. If we just want data, and I think just specific criteria, let's just go back to the BCS model and rank them 1 through 12. If we're going to,
I'm not against it. I'm not against it.
But I think if it's a committee, we got to be like, yeah, eye test is going to be weighted a lot heavier. But I think if we're like, hey, like Cole's saying a little bit, I agree with him. Like maybe it's like college basketball with Kim Pom and the net rankings. Where like, hey, if you go get a road win against a top 25 team, you get 3 points here, and you just calculate at the end of the year.
If you have a 64-team field and you want the
no, I'm not saying 64 team.
No. I'm just what I was going to say is if you want the computers to decide, if it's a 64-team field, whatever. Man, in a 12-team, I don't want the computers deciding the 12 best teams in the country. I don't.
Because the committee is 100% doing it right, right?
Well, Cole, that's why I asked the question. All right? We need some ball knowers on the panel, damn it.
We need some ball knowers, baby.
Yeah, that's our biggest problem. They don't know. Y'all don't know ball.
We care about you as individuals. That doesn't mean you need to be deciding which are the 12 best teams in college football. That does not mean it. No, I'm sorry. It just is what it is. Before we get on out of here,
I love that you just went playoff expansion. I love Cole Thompson wants more teams in the playoff.
I don't want.
Love that.
I
love it, Cole.
I need 2028 wants a 68-team playoff.
I have to wash out my mouth.
Listen, it works for the FCS. Why not?
No, it's just I'm not okay with seeing teams that did a half-ass job be rewarded with the first round bye. I'm just not okay with it. And so if that's what it takes to make sure that we get 8 games on campus for the first week, so be it. Whatever. I'm not going to sit here and argue. And then maybe we get a second game. And then we get back to the NFL model the way we is. But whatever.
Well, gentlemen, the beauty is this. We've got another slate of great games this weekend, and the committee gets another crack at it next week. And we'll react to it. We'll be here breaking it all down. Of course, Thanksgiving week, we'll be going into the final weekend of the 2024 college football season. It is crazy to say that, boys. But again, great stuff as always. Dave Shumate, Cole Thompson. I'm Chris Phillips. They join me. Again, y'all, appreciate you all tuning in. Like I said, we'll do this every single night or day whenever the ranking show is, leading all the way up to that final rankings day where, again, hopefully by then the committee will have figured some things out and we'll have some – we probably won't have any sense made of this, but we'll do our best to break it down for you and make the most sense of it we can. So anyways, guys, in the meantime, make sure you like, subscribe, turn notifications. Check us out via podcast where you get your podcast. You can also find us across all social media platforms as well as our website, secunfiltered.com. Again, appreciate the over 1,000 of you tuning in live to the show. We appreciate each and every single one of you. For Dave Shumate and Cole Thompson, I'm Chris Phillips saying so long, and we will catch you on the other side.